Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Grayzone. It's been a minute, and we are live. It's me, Max Blumenthal, here with my very close colleague, Anya Parampil, live from downstairs. And we're now live on Rockfin and Rumble and Twitter, as well as YouTube, for as long as they allow us to be there. Anya, how's it going?
Doing pretty well, other than this cold. So if I'm sniffly or look like I'm blowing my nose, that's why, guys. Sorry.
And how is it looking on Rumble? I think I should check in and see how we're doing on Rumble, just in case someone is complaining there's a technical problem there. Well, it's fine. Okay, so yeah, we have a lot to talk about today. We're going to be joined a little later by Aaron Mate. Yes, we are a little bit under the weather here, but we weren't able to stream last week, so we wanted to get at least one in this week. Unfortunately, it's before the debate, not after the debate. Anya, anything you're expecting tonight for the first debate between the second Democratic candidate and Donald Trump, Kamala Harris?
I try not to make predictions because I feel like anything is possible with this election, though it will be interesting, I think, just for Kamala to act as if she's an agent of change. That's the most bizarre aspect of this campaign for me, because people aren't very content with the situation in this country right now, and she's actually running as if she had nothing to do with the last 3 years. And in some ways now trying to adopt some of Trump's policies. So whether that's build the wall or responding to some of the discontentment regarding immigration, it'll be just interesting to see how she plays that, because she's such a phony. You never know. She can pull anything out of her hat.
Yeah. And she's going to try to get a rise out of Trump, but Trump was actually pretty disciplined in the debate against Biden. I think he understands that that's going to happen. His first debate with Biden in 2020 was a disaster for Trump because he came out too aggressively. He allowed Biden to provoke him. And since then, he's shown discipline.
But it's boring. I much prefer the 2016 Trump, when he could come out swinging. I wonder if he will play any of Kamala's issues with race, or the fact that she has a record of jailing Black people against her. And I wonder if she's going to say, I'm speaking at any point. That's kind of what she's definitely going to try to play up the sexism, and Trump is under all this pressure to not play into it at all. I kind of wish that he would just be himself, because that's what people like. But I know I saw Nikki Haley on CNN just now saying that Trump has to be careful with how he talks about women or how he speaks to women. And to me, that just makes it boring, to be honest.
Yeah, it is boring. And one other thing I noticed in the debate between Trump and Biden was that they both seemed to be skirting the Israel issue, which is unusual. Trump on the trail, he said that if you don't elect me, Israel will cease to exist, which is, I guess, his best argument for electing Kamala Harris. And he has said that Jews who vote Democrat are not really Jewish, or implied that. He's run an ad, which we'll play a little bit later if we have time, promising to attack Iran, or to spill a gallon of blood if anyone attacks an American. I wonder if they're going to actually try to outdo each other to demonstrate who's more Zio-cucked, because Trump has actually begun hammering Kamala Harris and attempting to paint her as soft on Israel when there hasn't been any change at all. Like, nothing is happening. The U.S. is exerting no leverage on Israel. We've been seeing images across our feeds of chopped up babies in Gaza all week. Nothing new is happening, but Trump is hammering her as weak. And a new poll just appeared showing 63% of Democrats, over something like 28%, No, it's not Democrats, American Jews. 65% of American Jews support Kamala over Donald Trump. Donald Trump's numbers were below 30. So I wonder if he's going to push this issue. And that'll be fun for everyone who thought that, yeah.
They push that issue when they're talking to fundraisers or the Jewish constituency. It's not as if the Jewish population in the U.S. can swing the election one way or another in terms of voting at the polls, in terms of numbers, right? So whether he has 30% or 60%, that's not a huge amount of people. The question is who's filling the campaign coffers. That's when he says things like no Jew could vote for Kamala. He's just saying no Jew could give their money, like give it to me instead.
Yeah. I mean, he's not catering when he says that to the rank and file Jewish American voter, who also in the same poll listed Israel as third to last in their issue of concerns. It's to the Zionist billionaire class, the 0.01%, that really are pumping Trump's coffers and Kamala's coffers full of cash. And that's what the debate is for, which is sort of sickening because Jews get used as human shields for it. Obviously, yeah, I mean, there's going to be a few racial slash and burn moments. You said Haitians are eating cats. Haitians are eating cats. You got 5 black men nearly killed at the Central Park 5. I bet she'll bring up, then Trump could bring up her record as a prosecutor where she boasted of jailing black teenagers for truancy.
Yeah, that's what's so
and weird. Also her use of slave labor to fight fires in California. I mean,
well, that's what's so crazy about this dynamic is that Democrats are proud that they're running a prosecutor against a convicted felon. That's their big line that they constantly are repeating. But when it comes to the debate stage, if Trump can turn that on his head, he might be able to win some favorability with black voters, because honestly, she can say whatever she wants about the Central Park 5. If it's a competition of jailing black men, I think she wins.
Well, she was a prosecutor. There's so many of these Democratic women are prosecutors. What's up with that?
That's the only way to rise, that or some of the other techniques that Kamala may have employed along the way.
Whitmer.
Klobocop.
Amy Klobuchar is a prosecutor.
It's Kamala. The way to prove as a woman that you're tough.
Yeah.
And to serve the elite in any given state, just jailing people. So, and then, you come in and you act tough by shutting down the garden centers and all that during COVID. And that's how you make your mark. So anyway, I don't want to talk. We should just move on because it's something that's coming in the future. And yeah, a part of me was wishing that maybe we'd waited until tomorrow, but then we wouldn't be able to talk about any of the issues that we're going to talk about because everybody would just be focused on the debate clips. I'm hoping for some funny moments. I want some real Trump moments, but I'm not confident that we're going to get them.
Yeah. I can't issue a bold prediction like the one we were issuing all over the place, which was that Biden wouldn't make it to the Democratic convention. And honestly, I mean, it's just such a depressing political landscape. Who cares? Interestingly, Jill Stein is winning among Muslim voters in 3 swing states that Kamala Harris has to win. And I think this is the theme of the show, at least the first part of the show. And the discussion I want to have with you is that while Donald Trump is not going to actually, and this is my opinion, he's not going to take on the deep state. He's going to be in survival mode if he enters the White House. And he's not going to be able to make gains. I don't see, a bold diplomatic venture like trying to make peace on the Korean Peninsula in a second Trump term after all he's been through. So he's not exactly a rebel. However, at this point, he doesn't have the leverage or the room. But the Democrats are truly consolidating themselves as the party of the national security establishment and the status quo. And everything that we've seen leading up to this debate and this moment, really, whether it's Dick Cheney's endorsement of Kamala or this indictment we're going to talk about, demonstrate the panic of the U.S. national security establishment over the shifting world order. And that's, part of my take on the indictment of 2 RT employees I've never heard of before for pumping allegedly $10 million into a right-wing influencer operation that had very little influence at all.
This morning, we unsealed an indictment in the Southern District of New York of Konstantin Kalashnikov and Elena Afanasieva, 2 Russian-based employees of RT, a Russian state-controlled media outlet. They are charged with conspiring to commit money laundering and to violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act. That law, enacted nearly a century ago, was enacted to ensure that the American people were informed when a foreign power engages in political activities or seeks to influence public discourse. The American people are entitled to know when a foreign power is attempting to exploit our country's free exchange of ideas in order to send around its own propaganda. The company never disclosed to the, and that is what we alleged happened in this case. In the wake of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, RT, which was then known as Russia Today, was dropped by its American distributors. The company ceased its formal operations in the United States, and the European Union, the UK, and Canada banned RT's broadcasting. But as RT itself has boasted, the government of Russia continued to use RT to direct disinformation and propaganda. In the wake of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine.
All right. So basically, the indictment alleges that $10 million was sent through RT after RT, left Washington, was banned by Canada and the EU, to create like a cutout of influencers. And in this case, although they weren't named in the indictment, it was something called Tenant Media based in Tennessee, run by Lauren Chen, who I had only heard about like a few months ago. She was sort of, Groyper adjacent influencer type, sort of alt-right figure. And they had these videos by Tim Pool and Dave Rubin and Benny Johnson on this site that like nobody saw. And apparently they were paying $100,000 per video, and Benny Johnson, Dave Rubin, and Tim Pool and the people making the content didn't know, according to the indictment, that this money was coming. Yeah.
No, and Tim Pool even said that the FBI reached out to him as a victim of this crime.
Yeah.
Because they according to the indictment and the information that's come out is that they even created a fake profile for investors. When people like Tim Pool or Benny Johnson would ask who's investing, they made up this fake character in order to obfuscate where the money was actually coming from. And so it's clear, in my view, that whatever this operation, how it was set up, it was almost like a way of entrapping people like Tim Pool or Benny Johnson and Dave Rubin, because they had no idea where the money was coming from. But then just simply now, because of this indictment, the mainstream liberal media can go out there and say these majorly influential figures were funded by Russia, even though they had no idea that they were getting that money. And thus through innuendo suggests that they were part of an operation, even though, as you say, they not only didn't know, but the videos that were put out on this site weren't really breaking through it all. It kind of reminds me of like the Bernie Sanders Facebook ads that they made a big deal about. And in the meantime, in the last few weeks, Lauren Chen has actually led a movement to boycott Trump, to withhold votes from Trump from the conservative side because of his more moderate position on abortion. And so to me, the narrative that these were people that were taking money from Russia in order to boost Trump, based on that fact alone, doesn't really add up. But it does seem like it was set up so that people that are actually influential, like Benny Johnson and Tim Pool, could be smeared through association in headlines. And that's really dangerous, because I think it's important that they're not thrown under the bus or branded in that way, because I mean, going back to having worked at RT during the first round of Russiagate, when we heard that Trump won the 2016 election because of Russian interference, I remember anticipating the big Office of the Director of National Intelligence report that was supposed to prove that. And all they had were segments from RT.
Right.
Openly labeled RT. It was no secret. It was Russian state media, just like the BBC's British media or Al Jazeera's Qatari media. And so it was kind of laughable that this was this was all the evidence that the government had in order to make its case. It's remarkable to me that since then, this company was set up in order to funnel money in this way that in some ways proves the DOJ's and the liberal media's argument all along, because they didn't have anything before. But at the same time, it was concealing the root of the money from the people that were actually taking it. So it's a very tricky and suspicious operation to me. And having worked at RT all through its downfall, or, I left, by the time I left in 2019, it wasn't officially shut down until 2021, right after the
2022.
Yeah, 2022, right
like
after
the day of the invasion.
Yeah, like a few weeks later. By the time I left RT in 2019, I can tell you that the government that was calling the shots inside the DC office was not the Russian government. Not that it ever was, but it was the DOJ. It was the US government that had put so much pressure on RT that had people working in the office that was actually running the show. And so to now hear that this fishy campaign was set up, this fishy media company was set up, like I said, it almost seems like in order to entrap people, really makes me wonder.
Yeah, it's very weird. From the Russian side, why would you choose those guys as your geopolitical analysts to break through? Why would you allow that much money to go to that little? Yeah, but Dave Rubin, I mean, it's not like this guy's actually, a strong defender of Russia. If anything, he's aligned with Israel and is a tool for Israel. Benny Johnson, I mean, Benny Johnson's just like Conservative Incorporated. Tim Pool, he says some stuff about Ukraine here and there. Like he's a little more, he's more articulate than the others. But my point is, this is referred to by Merrick Garland as an influence operation.
Yeah.
This was an anti-influence operation.
As if they were taking direction from their funder when they didn't even know who the funder was.
Yeah. And it achieved no influence. So the only influence it wound up having was that the feds were surveilling this. I don't know what they did. If they demanded that Discord give them a backdoor to surveil all the chats, in compliance with US law, if they had human intelligence, if it was all just done through SIGINT or what, but they let it sit there for at least a year, monitoring it. And then they dropped it at the height of the election season in order to implicate Donald Trump in another Russiagate scandal. So it worked out perfectly for U.S. intelligence. And there's a new U.S. intelligence report assessing that Russia wants Trump to win. Well, if that's the case, this operation really backfired and was stupid.
I mean, Putin goes on the record all the time and says that he would prefer not Trump to be in office. I mean, maybe that's 3D chess. I don't know. But I don't think it's clear that the Russians really care at this point, considering they already dealt with Trump for one administration, had their big Helsinki meeting, and then saw it all go out the door. They don't trust necessarily Trump to come in and make peace. I think, if anything, peace will be forced just by the fact that there will be no Ukrainians left to fight the war. But it was very also offensive for me to hear Merrick Garland say that Americans have the right to know when a foreign country is influencing their election, when he's never done an investigation into AIPAC or any of the Zionist media entities that are far more prominent and influential than tenant media ever was. And it raises some tricky questions, because you have an operation like the Daily Wire that is just clearly a front for Zionism, like Zionist. They call themselves, they're like a Zionist Christian group, but they're kind of crypto there, and they run just cover for the Israeli government, bringing in all these major influencers like Matt Walsh and for a while Candace Owens to wrap up, issues like woke identity politics and trans identity politics which are pretty easy to dunk on, and then shield it or wrap it up in this like defense of Israel and what is actually the greatest threat to free speech in the United States, which is the Israel lobby. But it's tricky because in that case, you know, people will say, well, they're not taking money from foreigners, they're taking money from American Jews. But I mean, what's going on here? If we really are talking about or worried about foreign influence or running cover for a foreign country here, it's not Russia that's running the show. It's not Putin that showed up in Congress and got a standing ovation however many times Netanyahu did.
60 standing ovations or so. Yeah, I mean,
it's not
AIPAC,
Russia that can get Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman run out of their office, their congressional office, or threaten Thomas Massie for speaking the truth. It's not Russia that's doing that. So you can't compare anything to the influence of Zionist media or money here. And Merrick Garland, for whatever reason, would never touch that.
No. I mean, if AIPAC was forced to register as a foreign agent, you would see so many espionage investigations. It would never end, because they're definitely dealing with classified material spirited out of Congress and out of the various agencies. And Israel gets to look at all of it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mossad is actually involved with AIPAC. Like, give me a break.
And then with the funding, on the funding side, yeah, they use cutouts in the United States who are Americans. AIPAC says it's just a Jewish American group, and to try to register it as a foreign agent is anti-Semitic. And the government accepts that logic. So they don't have to report who they meet with, what the nature of their conversations were, if they spent money on taking journalists out to dinner, for example. None of that has to be reported. The way Israel operates, I actually know this through a friend who works on Wall Street and like hangs out with venture capitalists in New York. I'm not going to name the VC, the venture capitalist, because I don't want to like I don't know what could happen, but he's one of the major venture capitalists, hangs out with like hip hop stars in his office, celebrities, a zillionaire, and he's a dual Israeli American citizen. And he brags that he is a Mossad cutout. And when the Mossad wants to do a black operation, they tell him, we need you to deposit this much money into this bank account, and we'll tell you about it later, and then we'll repay you later, but it's your patriotic duty. And he just does it, no questions asked. So that's the way they operate. I mean, there's a great piece by Jack Polson and Lee Fong about this organization Concert, which is basically Unit 8200 veterans who are running a vast influence operation straight through the Israeli government's Ministry of Diaspora Affairs in the US on college campuses. It's not, it's all out there, but most of it is being concealed through cutouts. So there isn't much that can be said. So they
if DOJ wanted to investigate that, they could, and you know, they're not going to do it. And we know, I mean, it's pretty clear why. I mean, if you look at the course of this war in Gaza. One other point I wanted to make is that Lauren Chen has not been convicted of anything, hasn't gotten to explain herself, but YouTube has completely removed all her videos from her own personal account. So there is no due process on YouTube or on social media. They completely removed Scott Ritter's account 2 years ago on YouTube. Jackson Hinkle's account was removed on YouTube, and pretty much the national security state just tells YouTube and these other social media platforms what to do. We're struggling to get a channel going on TikTok, and you know, we are an organic independent media outlet, but they censor virtually everything we do. So they just took Candace Owens down, or
they just gave her 3 strikes for 3 past videos out of nowhere,
just back to back, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, and we got a strike again. We were banned on YouTube from reporting from the Democratic National Convention after our first stream for the most arbitrary reason possible. So that whatever
Napolitano did,
whatever stupid and embarrassing thing she might have done, Lauren Chen, there's no justification for YouTube taking her down before anything is proven or she's been able to make any statements. And, you know, so we're witnessing a resurgence, not just of Russiagate, but McCarthyism on steroids. This is all coming from the same place. You know, if they're not going to be able to indict someone or send FBI agents to their house like they did for Scott Ritter, because he was contributing to RT and Sputnik, writing articles and published a book in Russia. I don't know the full story. If they can't do that, they're just going to smear people with, just straight up bogus info. Here's someone who's actually funded by the US government and the arms industry, Olga Lotman. This Ukrainian American Banderite termite who works at SIPA, which is Center for European Policy Affairs, a US government funded organization, funded by the State Department, funded by a who's who of arms industry companies, making a literal killing off Ukraine, calling for just investigating anyone she doesn't like. Just investigate. There's no evidence offered here for any basis for investigation. Of course, I'm there with Aaron, Alex Rubenstein. I mean, just on and on. Anyone she doesn't like, Kit, Wyatt, Jack Posobiec, Doug McGregor, who was a U.S. Army colonel. And so this Ukrainian lady is coming in here with a U.S. government-backed think tank behind her and just creating a potential McCarthyite blacklist for House Un-American Affairs Committee. How does that happen? And
foreigner.
Yeah, a
foreigner coming here and calling for the arrest and investigation of Americans that are actually standing up for their own country and their own rights. It reminds me of Daniel DiMartino, this Venezuelan that I was supposed to debate tomorrow on 9/11. And he released a similar statement right after the Lauren Chen indictment came out. He said that the Grayzone, Jackson Hinkle, he has no doubt that we're also taking money from foreign governments, and that that the DOJ should deliver justice there. Like, excuse me, I'm born here. You are living off of like US government scholarships to be at the Manhattan Institute or whatever. I'm probably paying for that out of my taxpayer pocket. You don't get to come here and like demand that my rights get taken away, my free speech rights. I mean, I don't even have to say, because we say it all the time, that we go to great lengths to never take money from foreign individuals or governments, because you just don't want to open yourself up to any criticism. We're obviously major targets for the US government. But it's just so offensive that these people like Olga and Daniel, who are actually not from here and are funded by our taxpayers to be mouthpieces of the US government and whatever industry and banking institutions fund their little institutions or their little groups, come here and demand that we have our rights taken away and that we forfeit all of our money to go overthrow their government back in their home country because they just want to return to power. Like, if you're going to be here, you have a stake here. You don't get to keep whining about what's going on in Venezuela and like forcing my country to do something about it.
Yeah. And that's the ultimate objective, is to burrow from within for these little.
Yeah, he had the nerve to call us enemies within. Excuse me?
Yeah, no, these are the real enemies within, is these little Esqualito parasites like Daniel DiMartino, who come here and try to get their hands on the wheel of the U.S. ship of state and steer it towards military conflict and destroy their former countries and send waves of migrants here. They and then they attack us as enemies for opposing those disastrous policies that they've been responsible for. And I mean,
for believing in what I think
they're just Ahmed Chalabis from under different flags.
Yeah. And, I think that what I'm advocating for is an actual America First policy. In the interest of the United States, there is no reason that we should have conflict with Venezuela or any of these other countries. And yet they want to come here and use us and abuse us, much like the Israel lobby. So, just you can't come for me here. You can't, because I have a constitution. I have rights as an American, and you're not going to be able to take them away, Daniel.
Anya, really quickly, the Uhuru 3 from the People's Uhuru Party are on trial at a federal court in Tampa, Florida, for supposedly also being participants in a kind of Russian influence operation. Basically, the government's case holds that they took like a paltry sum, chump change, something like $5,000 to $7,000 from a Russian named Ayanov. I can only remember his last name. And the government states without much evidence that he was an FSB agent who took them on a tour of Russia, and that they came back to the United States and then began actively agitating against the proxy war in Ukraine. Now, I actually didn't really see that campaign that they ran in the United States as having any influence either. It might have annoyed the government to see Black people campaign against a proxy war in which our tax dollars are now officially going to the 3rd Battalion of the Ukrainian army, which is the Azov Battalion, going to neo-Nazis. It might have annoyed the government, upset them, but this is a organization under Omali Yeshitela, which has been for decades an anti-imperialist organization based in Tampa and St. Petersburg in Florida. But the case is happening now. Jury selection just took place. We haven't been down there, but you went in during the last round of the trial.
I went during a pre-trial hearing during which the defense was actually filing a motion to dismiss the case based on the fact that these Americans were exercising their free speech rights. And so just the act of bringing the case, according to the defense, is a violation of the Constitution. Unfortunately, the judge didn't agree, and this trial is moving forward. But not only was this group, first of all, they were already well established. Their positions were already well established after they took whatever money is in question. The group had already gone on these tours or written articles taking these anti-war critical positions. And Omali Yeshitela himself and some of the other prominent activists are a major thorn in the side of the Democratic Party in Tampa. Just when it comes to local politics, they've run third-party campaigns and made the point. They were one of the major Black groups that would actually challenge Barack Obama from the very beginning. They saw right through him. He challenged Obama at a local event and questioned him, and it made local headlines. And so, yeah, it's very clear from my perspective that was the Joe Biden administration, the federal government retaliating against a third-party political enemy, and they were able to dig up these receipts demonstrating that this one tour or whatever they went on was paid for. But again, it's not as if their positions changed. They always had those positions, and they have the right to exercise their free speech here regardless. So if the U.S. is actually going to follow through and make a guilty conviction here, get a guilty conviction here, it seems like it would have a very bad precedent for all of the think tanks and foreign lobbying groups in Washington, D.C. that are paid to say whatever Qatar and the UAE and Saudi Arabia and the NATO powers want. I mean, that's what D.C. runs on, are big bucks, not like $5,000. Let alone the fact that, they can't prove that this Russian individual is connected to the FSB. They just do it through innuendo, much like they did with this DOJ indictment. I love how the guy's name is Kalashnikov to make it sound extra scary.
Konstantin Kalashnikov. But there's a free speech precedent here in this case. Explain that the prosecution is arguing that you can be prosecuted, correct me if I'm wrong, for speech that echoes Kremlin talking points, even if you weren't directed to do so.
Yeah, and even if it's correct, even if it's factually just the truth, like if you read the DOJ's case, it's all basically saying that if you watch Judge Napolitano's show, Judging Freedom, and you listen to John Mearsheimer, Professor Mearsheimer, or Jeffrey Sachs, any of those guys could be, their speech could fall under this category of being pro-Russian if they're just speaking based on history and facts. So it's pretty scary as Americans that this is going on. And the New York Times did a crappy article about it and aren't really seemingly interested in defending free speech here. Surprise, surprise. So hopefully it's going to be a couple weeks, months of a trial. I'm hoping to get down there at some point, though I can't see the whole thing, and get a feel for what's going on. I hope that a jury of their peers can see through the government's case, but at the same time, it's like they just use so much manipulation and fear tactics that you never know. It depends on the kind of people that you get. They're lucky that they're not in Northern Virginia or something like, that. I'll say that much. There's a chance that in Tampa, maybe they're going to have some independent, thoughtful people on the jury.
Yeah. Well, there have been a number of bogus terror trials down in Tampa, and local juries actually were not hearing what the government. We're not easy dupes for the government. I should put it that way. The post 9/11 trials in Tampa. So it will be fascinating to see how much Russiagate propaganda has affected Americans. The prosecution, the government's bringing a lot of the kind of counter disinformation experts to testify. And there are rumors, I guess we'll confirm it later when Aaron comes on, that Aaron Mate will be an expert witness in this trial, which I think could be pretty powerful with his understanding of the manufacturing of Russiagate as this titanic scandal, the exaggeration of it. And as I was saying before, this is all coming from the same place. The establishment, which has invested its hopes in Kamala Harris, the national security establishment, what is colloquially or crudely referred to as the deep state, is getting increasingly desperate, worried. It can no longer control the flow of information as it did before. The propaganda model that Ed Herman laid out with Noam Chomsky in The Manufacturing of Consent, and before that, Michael Parenti in inventing
Reality.
Inventing Reality, is cracking. It's cracking. It was kind of a propaganda model where corporations could, create media networks and convince the public that there was nothing wrong, and to suppress, the natural impulse of the public to protest, to rebel, to demand progressive change. And that's cracking as the mainstream media is just discredited across the board, losing viewership, readership. The Washington Post, which smeared us in the sleaziest, most bogus way possible, they've lost 50% of their readership in the past 3 years. And so
CNN has money troubles.
Yeah, they have money troubles. And so they're targeting influencers, which is where a lot of people are going. And you have a lot of young men in particular who feel alienated and left out, who are increasingly interested with the outside world and with geopolitics, and they're looking for answers. And so CNN is running a special targeting someone who actually is influential in shaping opinion in alternative media, someone who's really figured out the Twitter algorithm. They're running an attack piece on Jackson Hinkle. And I think it's part of this same initiative that we're seeing.
Next Sunday on The Whole Story, how does a Bernie bro become a pro-Trump, pro-Putin social media superstar?
I've been to Russia, I've been to China. Their major cities are much nicer.
Donnie O'Sullivan meets the terminally online young men of the disillusioned left.
MAGA communism.
People watching CNN are going to say, you're crazy.
And star influencers trying to stop the spread of misinformation.
All 5 of the people watching CNN.
Right-wing rabbit hole.
The Whole Story with...
Well, let's watch that part again.
Trying to stop the spread of misinformation.
I want to make sure that they're not falling down this right-wing rabbit hole.
The Whole Story with Anderson Cooper, next Sunday at 8 on...
So it's called Misinfo Nation, The Lost Left. And it's targeting Jackson Hinkle and MAGA communism. And then you have, watch this again.
With misinformation.
I want to make sure that they're not falling down this right-wing rabbit hole.
And it's, that's Hassan Piker, the nephew of Cenk Uygur. And he's the good left-wing influencer who is credentialed at the Democratic National Convention. And there's Donnie O'Sullivan, who is the CNN sort of counter disinformation reporter, who's always hitting any counter hegemonic media personality, people that most Americans have never heard of. One thing he will never do, ever, is attack elite misinformation or Israeli disinformation or the Pentagon's disinformation. He's always punching down, and he's a complete tool for the national security state. He's working hand in glove with them. They set the agenda, just like Brandy Zabroni at NBC and all these other fake counter disinformation reporters who suddenly just cropped up out of nowhere during the Trump era when the national security elite got frightened of populism. So they're targeting Jackson Hinkle. Hassan Piker is sort of the snitch who's posing as the good leftist. And it's very revealing just to see that preview and to see this, how it's coming out at this particular time. After FBI agents show up at Scott Ritter's door after this indictment, somebody's freaking out. And I actually don't think their freak out is justified. I think their budget is just too high and they're trying to justify their bureaucratic priorities.
I mean, to a degree, I think from their perspective, their freak out is justified because, as you say, they've lost control of the narrative and it's not going back. I mean, they can make that comment, oh, CNN viewers are going to think you're crazy. Well, not many people are watching CNN and buying it anymore. Actually, more people are watching Jackson Hinkle. And that's what they're so upset about, is that Jackson is very effective. For example, just recently, he was in Venezuela during the most recent election there, when there was definitely an attempt by the U.S. to overthrow the government once again. And Jackson was breaking through big time on social media in a way that the influencers that usually go down there could only dream of. And that's why they hate Jackson. That's why they can't. And also because they can't put him in a box. They can't just say, oh, he's a weird loony leftist who won't catch on to the country because he cares about trans rights more than he cares about just things that most people are dealing with in their daily life. He doesn't fall into that category of leftist that you can just write off because most people don't like them. He's actually charismatic and articulate. And if a lot of these discontent men that you're speaking of hear him, they might actually say wait, this guy has a point. It's kind of like a competition between the Jackson model of the future or the Nick Fuentes model.
Exactly.
And so they really hate those guys because they reach a large audience and they can't be shut up. They can't be controlled. Well, Nick's a conversation for another time, but I think that he poses a similar threat, and that's why there is this extreme overreaction to them in some instances. But Jackson, congratulations that CNN invested all that time and money into smearing you, and keep it up, because what they want is for us to be afraid to speak. They want us to think that we're doing something wrong by traveling to other countries and meeting people and hearing what life is like there. And the reality is that the global order, like you said at the beginning of this show, the liberal order has failed the world in terms of countries, and its liberalism at home has failed this country. Americans are very fed up with what has been going on here for decades. It's clear that what we've been doing isn't working. Whether it's the fact that our economy is completely fake, or that people are under 40 and 30 are just on drugs, incapable of finding mates and reproducing. It's a miserable experience really in this country right now for a lot of people. And so that has to change. And these people don't want it to change because they've been benefiting just sitting in their air-conditioned studios and CNN and, making us all hate each other, saying these people are racist and these people are pro-Russia, whatever. It's not working anymore, and it's not going to work. 10 years from now, I don't even think CNN will be around.
And on that note, and kind of switching directions, every president since Jimmy Carter who's alive would or has endorsed Kamala Harris, except Donald Trump. And it's because Donald Trump's running against her. So that means that all the people, going back to Carter, all the presidents who are responsible for the way things are circling the wagons for Kamala, as well as someone who really was president for about at least 6 of the 8 years of the George W. Bush administration, who is one of the most demonic figures to have served in U.S. government in my lifetime who really shaped the post 9/11 atmosphere by locking down America under the Patriot Act and this security state and spreading violence, unprecedented violence to the Middle East, which has unleashed wave after wave of instability in the form of ISIS after some 100 million Iraqis were killed. And we're still living it with it today. That's Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney endorsed Kamala Harris after his daughter, Liz Cheney, who the Democrats made a hero because they needed a Republican to serve their interests on the January 6th commission. Liz Cheney endorsed Kamala, and then Dick Cheney's endorsement followed. And now he's enjoying this renaissance. I always was predicting, like when everyone was like, welcome to the resistance, David Frum during the first Trump term, welcome to the resistance,
Bill Kristol.
Bill Kristol, yeah, woke Bill Kristol, that Dick Cheney would eventually join the resistance, and he has. And here is how Kamala Harris reacted to his endorsement. I think this is her on the phone with Dick Cheney.
Actually, I'm honored to have their endorsement, and I think that what they both, as leaders who are well respected, are making an important statement that it's okay, and if not important, to put country above party. And I'm honored to have their support, and I think it's an important statement right now. A lot of what I think is happening, and I was just talking with some folks here in Pittsburgh about it, is that people are exhausted about the division and the attempts to kind of divide us as Americans. And them stepping up to make this public statement, I think, is courageous, but also for people like the folks I was just talking with, it really reinforces for them that we love our country and we have more in common than what separates us.
Amazing. I mean, the division. We're tired of the division. We need to stop fighting Dick Cheney and come together.
Yeah, well, even some progressive media influencers have done that, fallen in line. Well, or they have this weird narrative like Emma Vigeland or whatever her name is, and Kyle Kalinske. First of all, attacking Republicans for defending Dick Cheney for years, as if that's relevant when it's 2024 and now he's in your tent. Or Emma saying that this is Dick Cheney's rebranding campaign. Like, he didn't retract a single one of his views. He didn't have a come to Jesus moment. How can it be a rebranding campaign without an actual rebrand? It's the Democratic Party that has rebranded in my lifetime, from being the party that marched with me in the streets against the Iraq War in 2003 to the party of Barack Obama drone kill list baseball card player and expansion of dirty secret warfare around the world, and Hillary Clinton. We saw he died cackling witch. That's the Democratic Party. So I think maybe it's the party, the cult, that has changed, not Dick Cheney. The fact that he can find a home in that party under Kamala says more about the party than it does Dick Cheney. Yeah. And I just, watching that clip of Harris, I mean, as we mentioned earlier, I'm not confident that Trump is even the Trump of 2016. Like, I don't think it's going to be this rah-rah big shakeup that I maybe had hope for in 2016. But when you see a clip like that, like that alone, if there was nothing else, would just really make me want to vote for Trump. Like, it actually makes me want to vote for Trump when I see Kamala Harris saying that about the Cheneys, because it's such a betrayal to what I used to believe the spirit of the Democratic Party was. And the fact that they're bringing in this demon is very scary. And so it's someone needs to write a book about how that's what the Democratic Party became.
Well, it definitely doesn't make me want to vote for Trump, who's going to have Mike Pompeo.
Well, that's true. I know. I agree. But that clip, I'm just saying, when you see that clip and you see them defending Dick Cheney, it's like,
no, it's outrageous. It's just a complete red line. It's a complete red flag. It shows that the Democratic Party is a completely Machiavellian party that has no principles at all. If you're like my age and you remember how the Democrats talked about Dick Cheney when he was vice president, and all the books that appeared, and the columns that are written at The Nation where Joan Walsh, the pathetic Hillary Clintonite Joan Walsh, is welcoming Dick Cheney's endorsement. They were calling the Bush era, the fascist. It was like fascist second coming of Nazi Germany, and Upton Sinclair was right. Fascism will come wrapped in an American flag, and the Christian fascists are ruling us. And, Dick Cheney is the epitome of evil. Now you have, it's not just Joan Walsh. That doesn't surprise me at all. But you have this coalition now of AOC and Dick Cheney supporting Kamala Harris. And here's Bernie Sanders.
Senator, before I do have to ask you about her recent endorsements by two people who are not progressives at all. Of course, I'm talking about Dick and Liz Cheney. This week, they said they're going to support her. They're going to vote for her. It's worth noting, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney voted with former President Trump more than 90% of the time, was quite critical when President Biden picked her as his running mate. Would you welcome seeing Liz Cheney out on the campaign trail?
Well, Kristen, what I think Dick and Liz Cheney are saying is that in this existential moment in American history, it's not just issues. Cheney and I agree on nothing, no issues. But what we do believe in is that the United States should retain its democratic foundations. And it's not just Cheney. I think there is a significant number of Republicans who say, well, I may not agree with the vice president on this issue or that issue, but I cannot support somebody who's a pathological liar, somebody who fomented a insurrection to overthrow the election return. So I applaud Cheney's.
Remember when Dick Cheney and George
obviously
Bush stole an election?
They straight up stole the 2000 election. They stopped the vote recount. It was the most obvious theft of an election ever. We'll probably get this live stream taken down for saying what Maxine Waters, Jesse Jackson, and all the Democrats who felt disenfranchised in 2000 said openly. It was a completely invalid election, and Bush was appointed by the Supreme Court. And then they proceeded
after having interference from his brother's Supreme Court in Florida.
Yeah, and his brother and Catherine Harris, who was appointed by his brother as Secretary of State, stopped the vote recount to prevent pathetic Al Gore from winning. And then Al Gore just stepped aside because Al Gore is part of this whole betrayal and said, we're not going to do any protests. We're just going to let Bush be president. Just like Bernie. And Bernie's saying, how many times is Bernie going to betray his movement? He's saying that he will not support, he'll say he won't support a liar. Is Dick Cheney not a liar? Dick Cheney's someone who ushered in a secret torture program and kept it from Congress. He openly lied. He lied to Congress. It's an impeachable offense. It's a criminal offense. Dick Cheney.
So many Americans died because of those lies. Because it's not just like a lie, like a white lie that all politicians tell. It's like the Bush administration lied and millions of people died. So I don't even know why Bernie Sanders bothers anymore. If I were him, I would just shut up and enjoy my retirement or my small little place in the Democratic Party. Why does he have to continuously embarrass himself and insult his former supporters like that?
This is just memories of Dick Cheney.
No apologies, no regrets from former Vice President Dick Cheney for the harsh CIA interrogation techniques used on terror detainees after 9/11. What the Senate Intelligence Committee labeled torture in its blistering report this past week, the former VP today called necessary as he delivered a powerful counterattack this morning on NBC's Meet the Press.
Powerful.
Mr. Cheney took strong exception to that Senate report and, contrary to its conclusions, told our Chuck Todd that the interrogation techniques absolutely worked. NBC's Kristen Welker is at the White House tonight with more on this. Kristen, good evening.
Lester, good evening. Facing heavy criticism after the Senate intelligence report was released this past week, former Vice President Dick Cheney was unapologetic today and said the Bush administration got it right. Former Vice President Dick Cheney, unwavering in his support for the harsh interrogation tactics that happened on his watch, today ratcheted up his defense on Meet the Press.
I'd do it again in a minute.
Cheney argued the methods, including prolonged periods of waterboarding, were necessary in the wake of the September 11th attacks and insisted the procedures were not torture.
Torture was what the al-Qaeda terrorists did to 3,000 Americans on 9/11. There's no comparison between that and what we did with respect to enhanced interrogation.
A fired-up Cheney called the report politically motivated, and that was his more tempered language.
I won't use the word on your show. It may be family. It's a crock. It's not true.
And he disputed the report's claim that the interrogation tactics provided no credible information.
Absolutely
all of
not.
this information in here, no seed of doubt that whether this worked or not.
It worked. It absolutely did work.
Yeah, it worked. It worked in gathering false intelligence that he used to justify invading Iraq through the torture of al-Libi or the fake turncoat, the fake informant curveball. I mean, Dick Cheney lied and lied and lied when Ambassador Joe Wilson went to Niger to investigate whether they had sold yellow cake to Saddam Hussein's intelligence services to produce enriched uranium so that he could start a weapons of mass destruction and nuclear program, and determined in the New York and wrote in the New York Times that there was no such thing ever happened. Dick Cheney authorized the unmasking of Joe Wilson's wife, Valerie Plame, as a confidential CIA operative.
Yep.
Dick Cheney, when he was in the Bush administration, presided over the awarding of a $7.5 billion no-bid contract to Halliburton, the company that he resigned, where he resigned as CEO the day before he became the nominee of the vice president, the vice presidential nominee. And guess who ran the vice presidential selection committee for George W. Bush? It was Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney vetted all the other candidates. He said, none of them are going to work, so I select myself. And then he authorized this war in which he got $7.5 billion for the over $1 million of shares he got from Halliburton after he retired. And he still has those shares. So he's looking for more contracts. This guy is one of the most evil figures who've served in the U.S. government, along with the whole George W. Bush administration. They destroyed large sections of the globe. They set us on the path that we're on. They left thousands and thousands of Americans maimed. They destroyed so many lives. And it's just such an insult. And it's so upsetting to me that it's Dick Cheney who's walking free and having a renaissance right now and having his endorsement welcomed by the Democratic nominee when Donald Trump is the felon because he supposedly cooked the books on payoffs to a mid-level porn star. Like, that's justice in this country. Is there any accountability here? Does anything matter to you, Bernie? Should anyone pay the price for these corporate crimes and these war crimes? According to Bernie, no. All that matters is winning. They're all just Machiavellian figures with no principles at all, which is why I can never support that party.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say is Dick Cheney's revival and the fact that he's been welcomed into liberal media and the Democratic Party, along with all of the never Trumpers last time, is really a reminder of the absurdity of the fact that Donald Trump is the first U.S. president to ever face a criminal indictment. And for all the liberals that freaked out about the Supreme Court ruling on immunity, which I would let a legal expert discuss that. And I've talked to some who say that, yes, what liberals are saying, that it never gives you that it's going to prevent anybody from prosecuting a president in the future, is not true. Well, it's also like, you guys never did it. You had the chance, and then you were like, we tortured some folks. So does anyone believe that if a president commits crimes, or if Dick Cheney, if they weren't held accountable, then obviously no one ever would be, except for something stupid like what they're trying to do by going after Donald Trump. And it makes us feel like our government, our entire system has actually been hijacked by a one political party. Political party that's focused on Russia and not Israel. One political party that's focused on just Donald Trump as the singular evil, when in my lifetime, he's definitely the president that did the least amount of damage. Regardless, he made mistakes, horrible mistakes with Venezuela, with Soleimani. But if you're really going to say that, like, he's the one that we need to take out, and it's not like they even went after him for those mistakes. They went after him for really dumb things. Like, it couldn't be more clear. I've never seen U.S. politics look like more of a joke.
What did Trump do that was remotely as bad as what George W. Bush did? Like, and they're telling us this is the most important election of our lifetime, and that we're living in, we're going to be living in Nazi Germany when Donald Trump is elected. I mean, we've been through that. What was the Patriot Act? No-knock searches. All of our rights were just completely trashed under George W. Bush. And it's like it never happened. We're living in, this is amnesia country.
No, we're supposed to believe that Donald Trump was the worst period of time, like his presidency was the most insane, when really the most insane aspect of it was just the media and the meltdown and the fear-mongering and the push toward Cold War, hot war, right? Aaron, where is Aaron?
No, yeah. Well, as Frank Zappa said, the media is the entertainment wing of the military industry. And I would say, they're the entertainment wing of the criminal corporate war cartel that has captured the government. And we can see it so clearly now. With Joe Biden just drifting off into oblivion. I guess it's the closest we've seen to a president getting punished who committed war crimes. Drifting off into oblivion. The president's just gone. He was just at the beach for 2 weeks. And the government just keeps functioning. Things just keep rolling. Decisions keep getting made. The New York Times is writing articles about how Biden is more comfortable now and enjoying himself more. Yeah.
It's like he said he was unfit to run again, yet he's fit to remain president. Doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. So what does it matter? Aaron, if you're there, feel free to join us. The media.
Sorry.
What's going on with your?
It just keeps flipping up and it's bothering me, but whatever. Sorry, guys.
That's the Brandy Melville shirt?
Yeah, fast fashion.
So you're a racist for wearing that?
Yep. And a misogynist.
You're a self-hating woman. There's this Brandy Melville documentary out that's like a takedown of this brand I'd never really heard of. I would have never known about if you didn't exist in my life. And it's just for context. This is the stuff you get on Netflix.
It's what you watch on a plane. That's what
you watch. So you watch it on a plane.
Yeah.
So that shirt is racist according to that.
Yeah, I mean, they tried to take out. This is the filler that we're gonna run while we get Aaron in the show. But basically, it's this brand that they tried to demonize as uniquely evil by attacking the owner and the fact that they have like a one-size-fits-all kind of model, even though they're very successful and popular. Really, I think the documentary was just anything that was actually damning about it or disturbing was just an indictment of fast fashion itself. Like when they go to Ghana and show all the clothes that just get dumped there and are washing into the ocean and flowing into the sewer, like that's bad, but that's not Brandy Melville. That's just the entire fashion industry that's responsible for that. And I'm really tired of these documentaries because it was all based on complaints from former employees that are now suing the head of the company. And I'm tired of these documentaries on Netflix and Hulu and whatever that indict people in the court of a public opinion before they've actually faced a judge or a jury in the court of law. It's this new trend. I mean, they did it with like the Murdaugh trial. They do it with they did it with like the Bikram yoga guy. They like put anybody in a documentary, get a bunch of people who are like upset with them. And it's like very biased.
They did it to Julian Assange.
Well, yeah, they did it with him, but they didn't even make like these documentaries are it's just unfair, I think, to prosecute someone in a documentary and prove them guilty based on a prescribed narrative before they've actually faced a court of justice. That's my opinion. I actually don't even think it really should be like allowed. It's weird. Because once you make something a big media issue like that, I think it's hard also to say that the jury doesn't really know or has no idea about like what's going on in the case.
Shout out to Michael Jackson and R. Kelly.
Well, yeah, Michael Jackson was after he died, they indicted him and tried to ruin him. So
You can't play "Step in the Name of Love" at a wedding anymore.
You
but
can.
No, I don't know.
No,
you
people,
can play Michael
still love
Jackson.
Michael Jackson. He kind of overcame, I think, a lot of.
That's an R. Kelly track, but anyway,
Oh.
Aaron, as a lover of New Jack R&B, welcome to our discussion of our pop culture section of the Grayzone. How are you doing?
Brandy Melville.
I'm good. Yeah, I didn't realize we were doing pop culture today. I would have prepared for it, but
no, we were just winging it.
Yeah. Just to confirm something that was mentioned, I'm not going to be testifying at the Uhuru trial.
Okay, I heard that mentioned publicly, so I thought I could say it.
No, it's fine. Like the defense proposed me as an expert witness. I'm not totally up on the sequence. I think initially the government was going to say something about alleged Russian interference in 2016. So I was going to be brought in to discuss that. And okay, this could be like confirmation bias on my part. But if I have it correctly, and I'll correct this if I'm wrong, after I was introduced as a potential witness, I believe the government withdrew their effort to discuss 2016. I think so. But then also, and then they submitted a brief saying why I'm not qualified to be an expert witness. And I got to say, they made a pretty good case. Like they pointed out I have no peer-reviewed work. I'm not a professor, all these things, and I was reading this. I was like, oh, fair enough. It's hard to argue that. So, but I don't think the Uhuru defendants need me to make their case that they're being, as you guys discussed, they're being persecuted for political speech, for basically espousing views they've held and expressed their entire lives. In the case of the chairman, he's in his 80s. He's, his views have never changed. So the government is basically trying to criminalize him for having the same views while still accepting, as Max pointed out, a relatively small amount of money from a Russian national. And, I don't think that's criminal.
It's tough when you think about like an American jury. Are they just going to be so scared because they're hearing Russia, and like, can they even be swayed by a logical argument? It's tough because I give credit to the defense for going with this case, because there's obviously so much manipulation that Americans have experienced over the last few years that really, play into the government's hand. It's sad.
I pointed to there were a lot of bogus terror trials, but if people don't remember, the Samuel Arian and Holy Land 5 trials initially were thrown out by juries, and the government had to go jury shopping and go get new trials. And one of those trials, the Holy Land 5 trial, was in Dallas before a conservative jury. And like one juror actually was not on board, but the rest of the jurors wanted to throw it out. And the same with the Samuel Arian trial in Tampa, where he was accused of being the U.S. leader of Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And the defense got up and said, in their final argument, our closing argument is the Constitution. Our closing argument is the First Amendment, and that's all they said. And every member of the jury except one voted to acquit him. But because it was a hung jury, the government went and shopped for another jury until they got the one they wanted, until they started, then they tried to get him in a perjury trap. The point is, even conservative juries might not go for this. The American people are less malleable than the government thinks. So we'll see what happens. I don't know if Anya's still there or listening, but it would be cool if you wanted to stay there for one more segment. Since we're going to, are you ready to come back in? Give me a thumbs up.
One thing about the Sami al-Aryan case, if I remember correctly, I believe, was it WikiLeaks that exposed that actually the government was in contact with Israeli officials about the Sami al-Aryan trial, that Israel provided some of the so-called evidence against them?
Big time. Both of those cases were huge examples of Israeli meddling and interference in the U.S. justice system and U.S. politics to create the specter of these terror cells operating in the U.S. when there was no such thing taking place. The Holy Land 5 was an aid organization that was being prosecuted and persecuted for sending money to NGOs in the Gaza Strip. And the argument was, they're funding Hamas. These are NGOs that were also getting money from the Red Cross and USAID. It was the phoniest trial. There's a good book by Miko Peled, our friend, called Injustice, about the Holy Land Five. And there's a documentary about the persecution of Samuel Arian. Can I just respond to Aaron real quick? So in both cases, the Mossad sent an agent to the Holy Land Five trial, and they had to clear the entire gallery so that his identity wouldn't be revealed. And he was presented as an expert. And the Israelis brought the families of suicide bombing victims to cry in Samuel Arian's trial and appear outside to influence the media, even though he himself was not involved in any suicide bombing. So
it's kind of similar to what they're doing with Sarah Wilkinson in the UK now, where they raided her, threw her mother's ashes on the ground and all that, and then demanded information about where the wells that she's built, like raised money to build wells in Gaza. That was like the big focus of their questioning. And they were even asking her where the wells were built. It's like charity work that is now criminal.
Yeah. You can't build a well in Gaza. You can only build a gigantic crater with a 2,000-pound US bomb. Something we'll talk about. I wanted to cover this though, because we were talking about the press.
Oops.
And Dana Bash, someone who just seems sort of banal and almost anodyne, but who, if you've been paying attention, as most of the viewers of this show have been, of our live stream have been, people who follow the Grayzone, she's been one of the most virulently aggressive Zionist propagandists after October 7th. And she was protested doing at I guess Politics and Prose in Washington, D.C.
After World War II, every single journalist that was complicit in their war crimes was charged. You belong behind bars. You belong behind bars. We know who you are. We know what you're saying. It is not a war. It has never been a war. It is ethnic cleansing. It is genocide. There are children getting bombed after. You are complicit in the genocide. Do you understand that when you tweeted 5 days ago about the hostages, that there are over 10 political prisoners in Israeli death camps? They are concentration camps for Palestinians, and you are complicit in all of those deaths. You know, I think therefore I can ask her why she's telling lies on public air every single day. At 5 p.m. every single day. This lawyer is on national TV. National TV, and she's spreading lies. Every single time she lies, I say her up, and that's not right. She is killing people. You know you are. Look me in the eyes. Look me in the eyes. Yeah, of course I don't. Tell me that you deserve it.
Take your mask off.
Bloody Bash.
Dana Fash. I thought that woman was very brave for doing that, and spoke for all of us here.
I mean, just when you look at the videos that I saw on the last day coming out of Gaza, when you see the children, it's like, yeah, you understand why she's shouting.
Yeah, because Dana Bash, after October 7th, remember we were watching, I actually have the clip somewhere, but it's not worth playing. We'll play some of the more odious Dana Bash lowlights. But Dana Bash was commenting, I think on October 15th, when CNN was really cranking up the propaganda. Israel was about to start the ground invasion. And Wolf Blitzer just interviewed Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president, who said, this is a battle between good and evil. And then Wolf Blitzer, former AIPAC employee, tossed to Dana Bash. And Dana Bash said, yeah, you know, Wolf, the president of Israel is really right. This is a battle between good and evil. I mean, it was that level of salespersonship of genocide that we were getting from her. And then when Pramila Jayapal from the Progressive Caucus attempted to call for a ceasefire, here's how Dana Bash pushed back.
15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes, 3/4 of whom are women and children.
And it's horrible, but you're not seeing the Israeli soldiers raping.
Well, Dana, I think
women.
we're not.
Yeah, we just, I mean, that
it's horrible that they're killing them, but at least they're not raping them, so it's okay.
They're killing them and then dressing up in their lingerie in their homes after they slaughter an entire family. Like, what? I mean, she doesn't hide her bias. So Dana, yeah, she and Jake Tapper, I think, win the prize for manufacturing consent. Wolf is kind of just like a robot. He just like says his stuff. But Dana Bash is so passionately Zionist. Yeah, I mean, she deserves, whenever she's in public, to be questioned that way. I don't really condone protesting her at her house because I just think that's pointless. But she couldn't look that woman in the eye and was just trying to like make her out to be overly emotional when, yeah, at this point, after watching so many videos of dead kids, people are emotional, Dana.
And that's why you can see in that comment why they came up with the Hamas rape hoax, is so they could come up with ways to justify slaughtering so many people. That's the main goal of the Hamas rape scam. Because of course, what she said there, even if it were true that Palestinians were raping Israelis, it would still be a horrible statement to say anything that can justify slaughtering Palestinian civilians. But of course, it's not even true. I mean, she was citing a complete hoax.
I mean, it doesn't make sense.
We can't stress that. We can't stress that enough. And unfortunately, Pramila Jayapal didn't push back on that because, you know, this is how atrocity propaganda works. Like, there's a certain claim made, it's used for cynical aims to justify mass murder or a U.S. intervention, whatever it is. And it's just, if you challenge it, you get accused of being an apologist, a denier, all these things. But it's too bad that Pramila Jayapal didn't call it out as a scam and didn't actually call out Dana Bash for that comment, because it's so sickening.
And it's just like, you know, accusing someone of being a Holocaust denier or an anti-Semite. It just takes off the table any argument that they might be making. Exactly. And that's what Jake Tapper did about his fellow Zionist propagandist. These protesters target Dana at her home and this event because she's Jewish. This is according to Jake Tapper of CNN. There's nothing about her coverage of the Israel-Hamas war that is different from most other news coverage covering both Jewish, Israeli, and Palestinian pain. This harassment is anti-Semitism. She's just being targeted because she's Jewish. I mean, what did the woman say? She was saying, "You, Dana Bash, are really named Dana Schwartz, and you simply took the name of your first husband, Jeremy Bash, former chief of staff to the CIA and Pentagon, and you had a bat mitzvah, and you celebrate Passover, Dana Bash, and you go to synagogue on Yom Kippur." Like, it wasn't like saying anything. It was all about Dana Bash's commentary on the record, cheerleading for Israel's genocide. And of course, Jake Tapper is an even more invidious propagandist for Israel's genocide. And I went after him. It just infuriated me to see him try to just hide behind anti-Semitism. I said to Jake Tapper, "You and Dana don't get to hide behind anti-Semitism here. You each played a seminal role in marketing Israel's genocide to Americans after October 7th, pushing every atrocity hoax you could. When the Gaza Holocaust Museum is constructed, there will be a special exhibition about cynical Zionist propagandists like you and Dana Bash." Jake Tapper's name is still on the byline of a CNN report claiming Al-Shifa Hospital sat atop a massive terror command and control center. His fake report was sourced to one anonymous U.S. official, and it appeared hours before Israeli occupation forces stormed Al-Shifa, kidnapping doctors and hauling them to torture centers. The director of Al-Shifa Hospital is tortured and forced to eat dog feces in the Sde Teman concentration camp. No command and control center was found, and he's never apologized or retracted the report. He manufactured consent for the destruction of Gaza's entire public health system. He gave an uncritical platform to the lies of United Hatzalah, the extremist group of ultra-Orthodox grifters that fabricated atrocities about babies being baked in ovens and mutilated children on October 7th. They've been discredited even in Israeli media. United Hatzalah has even issued statements disowning the lies that their own volunteers told, including to Jake Tapper. Jake Tapper led a special report on the mass rape hoax of October 7th, which was spun out by the Israeli government. And we exposed his sources as frauds. Mondoweiss tore Jake Tapper's report to shreds and showed how so many of his sources are deeply connected and involved with the Israeli government. He's never acknowledged any of the debunking or responded to it. And then the sickest thing Jake Tapper did was a 7-minute long tirade explicitly justifying, I can play part of it, but I think we should move on, explicitly justifying Israel's operation in Gaza, attacking protesters, calling for a ceasefire, and addressing all Palestinians in the Gaza Strip in closing with the statement, "What did you expect?" As though they should expect genocide and ethnic cleansing, and that babies and children should expect to be slaughtered because of October 7th. That was Jake Tapper's logic expressed there. He's praised widely in Israeli media. He was even interviewed on Israeli media and presented as a hero back in December. So Jake Tapper's no judge of what's objective on the war on Gaza or Israel-Palestine, and it's disgusting that he would even try.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I would say to Jake Tapper, if he's claiming that woman is only protesting Dana Bash because she's Jewish, but even though, as you say, she didn't make it at all about that, I would ask Jake Tapper, if the perpetrators of these crimes weren't Jewish, or if he weren't Jewish, what would he have to say right now? Because he clearly is only like if it were like Assad in Syria, he'd be calling for regime change.
Well, he did, and in one of his final broadcasts in the Obama era, he was asked what Obama did wrong, and he said Obama failed to bomb Syria in response to all of these gas attacks. So yeah, Jake Tapper's for every war that the U.S. and its proxies wage. And I mean, this was, Aaron, do you remember this event at the 92nd Street Y?
I don't actually, but those are two lovely faces who certainly belong together. Yeah.
At the time, me and Katie Halper were going to do like a kind of mystery science theater commentary, like live commentary of this event, because it was live streamed, but we just never got around to it. It would have been really funny. It's pretty forgotten. I mean, Jake Tapper is fully aligned with the neocon camp, and this was an event on anti-Semitism where they
right. Jerry Seinfeld was in attendance. I remember this now.
Yep. Yeah. Another clear victim of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
I mean, how long did his show run on US TV?
What's so, and then going back to Jake Tapper's statement, he talks about like even the claim about covering Palestinian and Israeli pain.
Yeah.
Of course, implies there's some parity between the two, which is so insulting in itself. This like notion that 1,200 Israelis were killed on October 7th. We don't know how many were by their own government, but putting that aside, and then you compare that to, we don't even know the toll of Palestinians killed by Israel since then. But certainly the official toll is a massive undercount, a society entirely destroyed. And he has the gall to basically suggest there's some sort of parity. And of course, he says that they've covered the pain equally. I mean, even putting like that aside, his attempt to establish parity, he, as you talked about, he's promoted lies that have been carefully designed to maximize Palestinian pain. The Al-Shifa hospital lie, the Hamas rape hoax. So he's been actively involved in being a propagandist, not just to inflict Palestinian pain, but cause Palestinian mass death.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, they'll one day, I think the dust will settle and they'll be on the wrong side of history. Everybody will see it, and CNN probably won't be around, like I said. So,
well, moving along to, and Anya, you're welcome to stay, or
I'm gonna go tend to my cold so I don't keep sniffing on air.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for joining us, Anya Parampil of the Grayzone. Everyone, get Anya's book.
Soon.
Everyone, get Anya's new book, or relatively new book, Corporate Coup: Venezuela and the End of U.S. Empire. Anywhere you buy books, except maybe Politics and Prose in D.C., which had Dana Bash's recent event. I don't get to tend to my cold. Aaron, did you know that the Israeli military possibly killed a U.S. activist by accident? It possibly killed the activist and definitely did so by accident. That's according to its own internal investigation. according to this AP headline, as my hard drive gets attacked by pop-up ads. The Israeli military says it likely killed a U.S. activist unintentionally. Does that mean that they are not sure they killed the U.S. activist, or that they likely did it by accident?
A lot of qualifiers.
Yeah.
Well, at least the headline is naming Israel. That's like that.
Yeah.
That's set apart from other outlets like the New York Times, which, like what was their headline about what happened in the murder, the Israeli murder of this American protester, that like American killed in West Bank protest. That's how the New York Times put it, basically. Yeah.
We'll get that on screen in a second. Just for those who haven't been following, the Israeli military said Tuesday an American activist killed in the West Bank last week was likely shot, quote, indirectly and unintentionally by its soldiers, drawing a strong rebuke. A strong rebuke from Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the activist family. Israel said a criminal investigation has been launched into the killing of Aysenor Ezgi Egi, a 26-year-old activist from Seattle who is taking part in a demonstration against settlements. Doctors who treated Egi, who also had Turkish citizenship, said she was shot in the head. What a strange and misfortune to be accidentally shot in the head. I wonder who the shot was intended for. And yes, the way this was initially reported was pretty sickening. It was, of course, in the mandatory passive voice from the New York Times and so many other media outlets. Well, here, the Israelis are saying they did it. Killed by Israeli forces. This is Israeli media, the Jerusalem Post. American Turkish activist killed by Israeli forces at West Bank protest. American woman shot and killed at West Bank protest, according to the New York Times. We don't know who did it. The Israelis took credit, but the New York Times doesn't know. It could have just been like an argument she got in. And this is not the first American to have been killed since October 7th by Israel. Jacob Flickinger was an American citizen who was escorting the World Central Kitchen convoy in Gaza earlier this year when the Israelis authorized a double tap strike to kill them and their bodyguards. And we heard nothing from the State Department about Flickinger. He certainly wasn't called an American hero like Goldberg Pollen, the American who went to fight in the Israeli army and was taken captive by Hamas on October 7th and who died in Hamas, or was killed in Hamas captivity. And how did the State Department actually respond? The family of Egi wants an independent investigation. There can never be an independent investigation for some reason. I wonder why that is. Well, let's watch this exchange with Vedant Patel and a reporter in the State Department briefing room. Oh, the buffering is killing me. Oh, well, we'll get it.
Doesn't look like it's working. Yeah. There are others. I mean, it's just been so, it's so cringe to watch these U.S. officials from Blinken on down going out of the way to avoid condemning Israel. Finally, Blinken said something today, I think, after he came under pressure, that this is unacceptable, blah, blah, blah. But the State Department spokesperson, Vidal, he basically, what he says is just, it's comical. It's like, these are like the Baghdad Bobs of.
Well, I got it right here.
Yeah, okay.
There are different circumstances, but the president, in relation to an attack by Iranian proxies earlier this year, said, "If you harm an American, we will respond." Does that apply in this case, or are we talking about a different standard?
Well, it's clear to anybody, Simon, that what the president was talking about in that context was a terrorist attack or a direct attack from a state or non-state actor that intentionally was conducted to put Americans or American citizens in harm's way. And of course, when it comes to the protection of our citizens and our personnel, and if they are targeted, we of course will take appropriate action. As it relates to the events on Friday, we are still gathering information as it relates to what transpired, what happened, and as tragic as it is, and it is tragic anytime anybody loses their life, any civilian loses their life. For people who work at this department, it is especially tragic when an American citizen loses their life. But we still don't know with full certainty what transpired and what happened. And that's why we are working to get as much information as we can, as well as encouraging our partners in Israel to quickly and robustly conduct and conclude their process and make their findings public.
Well, they concluded it. They made it public, and they said that they maybe did it, and they did it by accident, or they may have done it accidentally. Thank you, State Department, for helping them arrive at that conclusion after declaring that if you kill an American, we won't really get that upset because it wasn't a terrorist attack. I mean, the reality is she wasn't supposed to be there, according to the State Department. She's not supposed to get in Israel's way. She was with the International Solidarity Movement, the same organization that brought Rachel Corrie to Rafah, to the Philadelphia corridor when she was killed in, I believe, 2003.
Yeah.
Defending the home of her friend who was a local physician from an Israeli bulldozer, which intentionally ran her down. I sat in the courtroom with her parents, Craig and Cindy, in Haifa, when they were suing the Israeli government for $1 for an admission of guilt, and watched that video over and over and over. And it was so clear that it was intentional. And then there was the shooting of Tom Herndl. I've also gotten to know his mother, Jocelyn, who's they're English, they're British. Tom Herndl was shot in the head by an Israeli sniper. He was with the International Solidarity Movement. I think someone named Tristan Anderson in 2009 was shot in the head by an Israeli self-propelled tear gas projectile. He was with ISM. And the ISM sends activists out there to defend Palestinians who are either being attacked by the military or settlers. In this case, Isanor Egi was with a group of ISM activists and Yonatan Pollock, who was one of the founders of the Israeli anti-Zionist group, Anarchists Against the Wall, who've taken a lot of injuries. One of their activists I knew, who is a lawyer who defended Palestinian children in Israel's Ofer military court, had been shot directly in the head by a member of the border police in a West Bank village that was having a wall basically built through the middle of the village. In this case, they're outside Nablus, and this is the story that never really gets discussed. In a Palestinian village that had been annexed by settlers, and the Israeli state had authorized that annexation and was ethnically cleansing those Palestinians. So they're challenging official ethnic cleansing, and the State Department's providing all the cover Israel wants to kill Americans getting in the way of that. And they're killing them with U.S. weapons, with M16s. M4 rifles are being handed out to settlers as we speak. They're being put in uniform by Itamar Ben-Gvir. Those are U.S. rifles. Yonatan Pollock, by the way, the Israeli, he was jailed for his opinions and his own activism within Israel. He's completely fearless, and he carried her coffin at a official procession in Ramallah along with Palestinian activists. And, you know, the respect she got from Palestinians, Isanor Egi, was more than the respect she received from her own government as an American. Utterly disgusting.
We also have to mention Shireen Abu Akleh. That was 2 years ago. American citizen. The State Department, I mean, that was particularly awkward for the State Department because she's a journalist working for Al Jazeera, a major international agency. But still, has there been any accountability there? Nothing. So, as you said, Israel has full impunity to kill everybody, not just Palestinians, but Americans too.
Yep. And I mean, we have so many clips of John Kirby, reciprocal Israeli U.S. spokesman, White House spokesman, National Security Council spokesman, declaring that it's all Hamas's fault. All of the, the slaughter in Gaza, and that it's all Hamas's fault for the collapse of the negotiations, and that the U.S. will exert no leverage on Netanyahu. Meanwhile, in Israel, there's a scandal emerging, another kind of torture scandal. We talked about the systemic rape scandal that has exploded into the open in Israel at Sde Teman prison, where members of Force 100, an Israeli military unit, have been filmed on camera sodomizing male Palestinian prisoners, brutally injuring them. And there's a fundraising campaign in Israel to support their defense that's raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. They've become national heroes. They're on talk shows all the time. This is the Israeli police in Megiddo prison, which is part of the archipelago of torture centers Israel's created after October 7th. And this footage uploaded shows what the Israeli police are doing to detainees. So, I'm not showing it just to show you the Nazi level activity that's taking place in Israel's torture camps, or to emphasize that, yes, Israel has constructed these kinds of concentration camps in territory it controls. One of the greatest Israeli minds, someone who's a hero of mine, Yeshayahu Leibovich, warned that one day, he said this in the early 1980s, one day Israel will create concentration camps to maintain its occupation, and it will no longer deserve to exist. I think it's pretty obvious we've reached that point now. But the subtext here is that these are the police that are controlled by Itamar Ben-Gvir, one of the biggest extremists to ever rise to power in Israeli society. And this is the kind of activity that he's authorized. He's called for starving prisoners. He's even called for executing and beheading them. And police are doing that. They're starving the prisoners. They're torturing them under his command. And they love him. And so whatever happens even after this government, or if Ben-Gvir leaves his role as Minister of Security, he will have exerted enormous influence on the police and will have a force within Israeli society that has a substantial monopoly on violence in various areas. Meanwhile, Israeli society itself internally is experiencing a massive crime wave because the police under Ben-Gvir have disappeared, particularly from areas where there are Palestinian citizens. These are poor areas in the Negev desert. There's a town called Rahat, which is in its own way, it's kind of like an Indian reservation. Israel put Bedouins there. It forces them to stay there to concentrate them, in their own words. And they're mired in poverty, and there are criminal gangs there that engage in a lot of trading through the Sinai desert. They're violent, and there have been 10 murders in the past few months there with no police presence, because Ben-Gvir is like, hey, you're Arabs, whatever happens to you, who cares? And gangs are beginning to overrun Israeli cities under Ben-Gvir's watch. It's sort of an internal post-October 7th crisis that Americans aren't paying attention to, but we're witnessing the dissolution of whatever thin mask of liberalism Israel ever wore. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Well, no, I just keep hearing more and more accounts of self-identified liberal Israelis leaving the country because they feel as if their society is just fundamentally changed. Now, of course, these same liberals are sort of overlooked or even justified the occupation, so that autocratic element was always there. But it just seems even for them who are willing to tolerate the oppression of Palestinians, things are becoming so difficult. And it's predictable when you construct an ethno-state built on ethnic cleansing. I guess this was always inevitable. It's the inevitable result of Zionism.
Yeah. I mean, you're not going to be able to survive as a military occupier who's completely ruthless with a bunch of whiny liberal poets in charge and Tel Aviv ravers who are like recovering from Mali trips every few days. It's not going to happen. So the killers are in charge, and the happy people in Israel, the people who express strong approval ratings of the government and of society, those are the settlers, the religious nationalists. This is the heartbeat of Israeli society, Jewish Israeli society. It's being expressed on a podcast called Two Nice Jewish Boys. They're very nice.
So I would, if you gave me a button to just erase Gaza, every single living being in Gaza would no longer be living tomorrow, I would press it in a second. That's just, I think most Israelis,
if that's the choice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, even if it's not like right now.
Yeah, no.
I would press it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same with the territories.
I would press it right now. Mm-hmm. No choice. No, Sharon is safe at home. God willing. I don't know. I haven't spoken to her in like an hour.
No, I'm saying for the chance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would press it right now. Give me that button and press it right now.
There you go.
And I think most Israelis would.
Yeah. Most Jewish Israelis.
They wouldn't post. They wouldn't talk about it like I am.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't post. They wouldn't say I pressed it.
Yeah. They don't have balls of steel like you.
They would, but they would press it, right? Like if they were in a closet alone, they wouldn't even hesitate.
Mm-hmm.
Someone came to them and said, "No one will know. You press this, all the Palestinians are gone." You'd be like, "Fucking hey, is there another one?"
Yeah, that's two. I mean, we're actually two nice Jewish boys. That's two Nazi Jewish boys, two Judeo-Nazi boys. And, those are influential figures in Israeli society. That's Eitan Weinstein saying he would push the button, and Naor Menninger. They're from the Ashkenazi elite of Israeli urban cosmopolitan society. They speak perfect English, and they're saying what Jewish Israelis have been saying for a long time in Hebrew. And I think that's what's so jarring about this clip was that they said it in moderately American accented English. Mm-hmm. And so I appreciate it. I appreciate that they did that because what he's saying is true. There is a genocidal current running through the mainstream of Israeli society. Because how much longer can they keep this anachronistic project of occupation and ethno-supremacism going while there are millions of Palestinians resisting them? It just becomes really uncomfortable. Weinstein has done events with Netanyahu. He's gone on tours of Canadian synagogues. He's someone who's completely welcomed by the North American Jewish establishment, and he's a genocidal maniac.
And I saw that one of them tried to issue some statement clarifying their remarks, but his statement basically ended up confirming that that's exactly what he meant, or he couldn't even retract it because, as you say, he believes it, and actually, a lot of Israeli society does too.
Here it is. So he's saying, like, the video was taken out of context. We did not call for the genocide of Palestinians. We're making a larger point about the fact most Jewish Israelis do not care about the cost in civilian casualties on the Palestinian side required in order to secure the Jewish homeland.
AKA calling for the genocide of Palestinians. That's exactly what he's doing.
We don't support genocide. We just support genocide.
Yeah.
And they go on and on and on. And then it's like, since the Gazans have proven time and time again their support of Hamas is indisputable, it's obvious to any Israeli that the only way to guarantee our future and safety here is to remove this threat from our vicinity forever. Genocide. And then they produce data to show that Israelis are genocidal.
Yeah. Yeah.
87% of them said they're for the complete annihilation of Hamas and continuation of the war. 44% are for Jews settling in Gaza. I guess that's what they're for. And on and on and on. So here they
I'll
are.
say it again. Hamas is more moderate than pretty much almost the entire Israeli political spectrum, with the exception of a few, fringe parties. But Hamas has previously, I doubt they would anymore, but even recently, even after October 7th, Ismail Haniyeh, the now assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, said that Hamas was ready to negotiate for a Palestinian state in just 22% of their land, the West Bank and Gaza. Huge compromise for Palestinians. Hamas was willing to negotiate that. Has any Israeli leader ever said that they do that? At least any current Israeli leader? No. And those Israeli leaders who said that they would favor that actually didn't in terms of their policies. People like Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak and Yitzhak Rabin. So Hamas is more moderate than Israeli leaders. It's not even close, because no Israeli leader has ever accepted the idea of a Palestinian state in just 22% of Palestinians' homeland, because Israel reserves the right to steal as much Palestinian land as it wants to in the occupied territories.
Yep. I mean, they offered a 40-year hudna. It was always rejected.
Yeah. Hudna being true.
And so, in the wake of Tony Blinken declaring that 90% of a ceasefire deal is worked out and that they're almost there, Israel carries out a series of heinous massacres and attacks Syria, killing dozens of civilians in another escalatory attack. The civilians were killed in Moasi, which is one of the tent camps that have been constructed because Israel's military told Palestinians in Gaza to go there because it was a so-called safe zone. And they keep bombing these places with 2,000-pound bombs, the size of the crater the bomb created in this tent camp. Whole families were eliminated. Scores. I mean, we don't know how many people are dead. They're digging for the dead with their hands because there aren't enough tools. Scores have been killed.
That's the biggest crater I can recall seeing, at least in a long time. I remember early on you had stuff like this, but I mean, as you said, this looks like the 2,000-pound bombs that the Biden administration claimed that they were not letting Israel use.
Right. They paused it and then they let them have it again. And so this is what they're doing with it. And there was a giant, go ahead.
Well, just for all we know, it could even be larger than 2,000. I mean, why wouldn't Israel use something even worse, given that they have full impunity from the U.S. and full support? And they keep saying we wouldn't be able to do this without the U.S. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. And there were previously giant craters in the Maghazi camp in December, attack that killed something like 150. Israel couldn't even explain who the target was there. And before that, the Jabalia camp massacre, GBU, heavy bombs were dropped in the middle of the Jabalia refugee camp. They said they eliminated some Hamas commander that no one had ever heard of. No consequences. And now there's just a collective shrug. I remember those massacres were reported in corporate US media, but we've moved on in anticipation of the debate tonight. And at the same time, Israel's attacking Syria. They've been attacking Syria for years and years and years now. Hundreds of attacks have been waged on Syria, but these are some of the most intense. Unprecedented attack on Syria today led to damage in 4 major cities: Homs, Damascus, Hama, and Tartus, including a major fire in the city of Masyaf and Hama. I mean, they're attacking deep into Syria.
And I just want to show how the New York Times reported the latest massacre in Gaza, the one that left all those craters, a massive crater. Oops, that's not it. 1 second. This is it. This is what the Times said. A civil defense official in Gaza says at least 40 people were killed. Israel says it targeted militants. And I think the term the Times also used was a Hamas command center, which was like a new one. I hadn't seen that one before. A Hamas command center,
He said, she said.
Yeah. Hamas Command and Control Center, Hamas Command and Control Node. So basically, anytime Israel carries out a slaughter, all Israel has to do is say that they were targeting some undefined Hamas command center, and the New York Times will print it as basically as fact and give it equal weight to what we know, which is Israel slaughtered a bunch of civilians.
Yeah. And they're still using according to the Hamas controlled health ministry death toll. They're still inserting that caveat to give readers an off ramp so they don't have to be horrified. Oh, the terrorists are just making it up. They're just holding baby dolls up that are dead. I mean, it's a shocking display.
And just to stress, this was one of those so-called humanitarian zones, right? Yep. Where Palestinians are told to go and told that they'll be safe from Israeli attacks. But Israel's made clear that that's just not true. Humanitarian zone means killing zone because Israel repeatedly attacks them.
They keep doing it again and again, attacking these humanitarian quote unquote safe zones that they've created. So essentially they've created a series of death camps throughout Gaza, and the US just keeps supplying the camp guards with more ammo.
This is the Times. Again, Gazan authorities reported huge craters and entire families missing after Israel said it struck a humanitarian zone to target a militant center. Okay. So it doesn't matter if it's a supposed humanitarian zone. If we can claim now there's a militant center there, then it's a killing zone, no longer a humanitarian zone.
I mean, even if there was a militant center there, how does that justify slaughtering entire families? That's the logic that the New York Times is accepting with that kind of wording.
100%.
This was something the U.S. government did not used to accept, even under the George W. Bush administration.
True.
When Israel assassinated Al-Qassam commander Salah Shahada in an apartment block and killed everyone in the apartment building with a 2,000-pound bomb, the George W. Bush administration condemned that. They also condemned it because Israel broke a ceasefire deliberately by doing that. Now it's just kind of, hey, that's what we need to do. Human shields. The Biden administration used the language of human shields again and again. I asked Vedant Patel, State Department spokesman, why do you keep calling them human shields? You're justifying the attacks on civilians. And he said, we never said that they are human shields. We said that Hamas uses them as human shields. He literally said that to me as if there's some difference in their deployment of that term. And then this is all the consequence of the Biden administration accepting the Israeli objective, the Netanyahu objective, which actually goes even further beyond regime change to the total annihilation of Hamas, which means anyone affiliated with Hamas can be slaughtered. Which that's like, you know, fascist logic. It's Pinochet logic. It's like put your entire opposition into camps, disappear them logic. And that's what the Biden administration has accepted.
Well, to quote Layla Al-Aryan, the daughter of the aforementioned Sami Al-Aryan, she's a journalist with Al Jazeera. She said that basically Israel's logic is that nothing justifies October 7th, but October 7th justifies everything. And that's pretty much the logic adopted, including being able to kill untold numbers of civilians if Israel can say that there's like a member of Hamas somewhere in the vicinity, which is just like what? Where did that concept come from? It's pure terrorism. It's worse than terrorism. It's basically mass murder, and yet totally acceptable now since October 7th.
And the attacks in Syria, we scarcely hear about them. I was watching interviews actually on Press TV with some of the survivors in a hospital. One of them was a firefighter who had arrived to try to rescue people, and his vehicle was attacked in a double tap strike by an Israeli drone to attack and kill the rescuers. I don't know. Some of the Syria trolls who used to claim to support Palestine, but really are just focused on regime change in Syria, privately celebrate those Israeli attacks. But they're increasingly as savage as the ones we see in Gaza.
Yeah. The Syrians, like Israeli strikes on Syria have just become totally normalized by pretty much everybody because, you know, and there's of course like the neocon establishment, they support that obviously because Syria is part of the axis of resistance. But then on the left, because of the divisions over Syria and what a toxic issue that is, and the intimidation of people who criticize the dirty war, a lot of people just stay silent. They just see that the Israel, like they don't connect Israel's occupation of Gaza and the West Bank and mass murder campaign to Israel's regular attack on Syria, member of the Axis of Resistance. Like that part is so normalized that even now when people talk about the Axis of Resistance in a positive way, or just to describe it, they omit Syria because the dirty war in Syria basically normalized Israel and the US's right to terrorize Syria. So that part just kind of gets overlooked all the time.
Definitely. And as I said, there have been hundreds of attacks on Syria. And after 15 years of dirty war, there's very little Syria can do. And it's worth pointing out that the Syrian quote unquote rebels who were cheered on by large sections of the US left, one of the first things they set out to do was destroy Syria's anti-aircraft batteries, to destroy its SAM batteries. They destroyed like 50% of Syria's anti-aircraft capacity to lay the groundwork for Israel to attack with impunity. While their leadership...
and that's just a quick thing. That's why Israel presumably gave them weapons, because I'm sure Israel appreciated it.
Yeah, completely.
And money too, and money. Yeah,
weapons, money, and while their leadership, the Syrian opposition, Burhan Ghaliun, and these characters, the exiled opposition, were promising to normalize with Israel if the West would just support them. That's what the U.S. left, the ISO type leftists, the imperialist socialist organization, international PSYOP supported. So, and then those same segments of the left support the Ukraine proxy war. They support flushing billions of dollars from U.S. taxpayers' pockets into the Ukrainian military. When there could have been, Aaron, there could have been a peace deal. There were certainly peace discussions. You've been talking about this for months and months and months. And now you have confirmation from none other than Victoria Nuland.
There was a story first told by former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett that was a story first told by former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett that both sides were really close to the end, to the successful end of the negotiations, and then Prime Minister Boris Johnson interfered and stopped prevented Ukrainians from signing the deal. And then Ukrainian Representative Arahami kind of confirmed it, that yes, he said in an interview that there was some kind of advice from Boris Johnson to stop negotiating and to win this war militarily. Where is the myth? Where is the truth?
Relatively late in the game, the Ukrainians began asking for advice on where this thing was going. And it became clear to us, clear to the Brits, clear to others, that Putin's main condition was buried in an annex to this document that they were working on. And it included limits on the precise kinds of weapon systems that Ukraine could have after the deal, such that Ukraine would basically be neutered as a military force. And there were no similar constraints on Russia. Russia wasn't required to pull back. Russia wasn't required to have a buffer zone from the Ukrainian border, wasn't required to have the same constraints on its military facing Ukraine. And so people inside Ukraine and people outside Ukraine started asking questions about whether this was a good deal. And it was at that point that it fell apart.
People inside and people outside.
Yeah. This is an extraordinary statement for many reasons. First of all, this is not news to people who watch the Grayzone. We've been talking about this from the start. And of course, we've been attacked for saying that the U.S. stood in the way of a peace deal. People like progressive proxy warriors, like former Bernie Sanders advisor Matt Duss, has called us out for saying that the U.S. stood in the way of a peace deal and mocked the idea that the U.S. did. Some progressive outlets have published articles basically dismissing this as basically as Russian disinformation.
Here's Novara Media.
Novara, there we go. Yeah, the West didn't halt Ukraine's peace talks with Russia. Okay, yeah. Well, I doubt even Victoria Nuland confirming that actually the West did will get them to issue a retraction because the facts don't matter. Listen, we've had so many officials admit this now. The top Ukrainian negotiator said that all Russia wanted was basically Ukrainian neutrality. That was their main demand. Another Ukrainian negotiator said that Russia made a very real compromise. He said Putin did everything possible to make peace. The admissions of all these people does nothing to put a dent in the propaganda narrative, because the claim that there was a peace deal undermines the narrative needed to sustain the proxy war. So it just, all this gets buried. So this is just more evidence for those who didn't need it, because we all know that this was the truth. But anyway, what I think is really significant here is I do think for the first time we've gotten a high-level official to admit the actual reason why the deal didn't go through. Previously, we've gotten a bunch of excuses. Remember when the deal first collapsed and then news of it came out that Boris Johnson came over and told Zelensky not to reach the deal with Russia? The excuse we got was that this was because of the alleged Russian atrocities in Bucha. And Ukraine was so upset that they could not make peace with Russia, who would carry out such horrific crimes. Now, there's plenty of reasons to question that argument, namely the fact that even after the alleged atrocities carried out by Russia emerged, Zelensky said himself, this is all the more reason why we have to make peace, is to prevent more atrocities. Now, I'm not even weighing in on what actually happened in Bucha, not something I've looked into. And even if it were all true, as Zelensky said, the way to prevent more atrocities is stopping the war. So that claim never really withstood scrutiny. And then you had another excuse which emerged recently, which this was in the New York Times article that came out recently, which for the first time actually published a draft of a Ukrainian-Russian peace treaty. It was very detailed. And the excuse we got then was that Russia tried to insert a clause at the last minute that would basically allow Russia to invade Ukraine at will. And as we've talked about before here on the Grayzone, and I've written about, that also doesn't withstand scrutiny, because the whole deal was premised on peace and no country being allowed to invade Ukraine. And basically, Ukrainian officials and proxy warriors basically took some language that Russia wanted about a joint consensus on how to respond to future aggression, and they tried to paint that as Putin trying to sneak in some clause about being able to invade Ukraine. But as we've discussed, that also didn't hold water. Now we get Nuland saying a brand new thing. Notice how she doesn't mention Bucha. She doesn't mention this clause about Russia being able to invade Ukraine. She said it's because Russia wanted limits on what weapon systems could be placed in Ukraine.
No!
Yes. So you mean that Russia, after seeing Ukraine go through a coup in which the U.S. helped overthrow a government calling for neutrality, and seeing that that coup government had a war on the Donbass because they didn't want to respect the autonomous rights of ethnic Russian Ukrainians, that after all this, Russia didn't want to have Ukraine basically hosting advanced U.S. weapon systems right on its borders. So that's basically Nuland admitting that the U.S. blocked this treaty or opposed it because they want to preserve the right of Ukraine to basically be used to threaten Russia with U.S. weapon systems. So I think actually we're getting refreshingly, for the first time, a candid admission as to why the U.S. blocked this deal.
Well, it also shows how she exists within this politically hermetic chamber where there's no understanding of why anyone would see any problem with placing heavy weapons brought there from thousands of miles away on a powerful country's border to threaten that country.
Yeah.
I mean, she thought she was like actually just laying to rest why anyone would think that peace deal might have been a legitimate, decent offer. Because the thing that no one in Washington, or especially London or Brussels, in the realm of Queen Ursula von der Leyen, will accept is that Ukraine should be neutral, is that Ukrainians had it better when they were neutral. And that means they also can't accept the internal dynamics of Ukraine. Sergei Lavrov, foreign minister of Russia, recently said that this isn't about territory. It's not about us and our desire to have territory. It's about the abrogation of the rights of some 35% of Ukrainians who speak Russia, who had their rights completely erased after the Maidan coup, which is correct. And you can see like what's been happening there. Russian language stripped as an official language, not taught in schools anymore, the worship of Bandera the jailing of Russian-speaking critics of the government, the disappearance of hundreds of them, hundreds of human rights activists from the Donbass, just killings of people across the Donbass. All of that is not respected as a grievance by Victoria Nuland or anyone in Washington. I don't even think there's an understanding of it. And so a war is taking place to bring things back to that point, and it never will. And all we hear are calls for escalation.
And it looks like Ukraine actually will likely get its latest request from the Biden administration, which is for long-range missile strikes with U.S. weapons into Russia.
It's not simply saying, oh, should they have this weapon system or that weapon system? There are a lot of things that go into it. Do they know how to use it? And some of these sophisticated systems take training, and that's one of the other things we've done. Can they maintain it? Because if you give them something that falls apart in 7 days because it can't be maintained, that doesn't do a lot of good. And then is it part of a coherent strategy to achieve a very clear objective? All of those things have to go into these decisions. But what I can tell you is we've adapted and adjusted every step along the way. We'll continue to do that.
So not ruling out at this stage.
We never rule out, but when we rule in, we want to make sure it's done in such a way that it can advance what the Ukrainians are trying to achieve.
How do you interpret that? And by the way, I got a hard stop in about 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, this follows the pattern. First, the U.S. actually does rule out certain steps. They did rule out ATACMS. They did rule out cluster munitions. They did rule out letting Ukraine use U.S. weapons to strike across the border. And every time, this is always the pattern, Tony Blinken comes along and says, actually, okay, we're not ruling it out now. We're considering it. And then it gets authorized. So this is the latest step in the escalation ladder. So if we're going by established patterns so far, I think this is Blinken signaling that, yes, this permission will be granted to Ukraine for long-range strikes. And there's a quote circulating from Mike McCall, the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, saying that Blinken told him that he's going to give this authorization. So, I mean, we'll see. I mean, like, you never know. But if we're going by established pattern, I think there's a lot of reasons to think that actually, yes, Biden is going to authorize, or whoever is making the decision is going to authorize this stuff. I shouldn't say Biden anymore, because who knows what he's actually doing.
And, you know, the irony, they're using allegations that Iran has sent exported ballistic missiles to Russia as justification for sending long-range weapons to the Ukrainians, which can strike Moscow. Iran has denied this. I don't know what the case is, but it's so funny to hear the U.S. complain about North Korea or Iran sending weapons to Russia when the U.S. is just so far outpaces anyone in shipping weapons thousands of miles away.
Yeah, well, and the fact that allegation is being made, that's a pretty good sign that as you say, will be used as a pretext to let Ukraine launch these long-range strikes. It's just unbelievable, and especially in light of Nuland's admission that all this could have been avoided had the U.S. and UK just let its client in Kyiv reach a peace deal that it negotiated itself with Russia, which was a pretty simple one. It was for Ukraine to declare neutrality, which is not a radical demand. It was enshrined in Ukraine's founding constitution. In exchange, Russia would withdraw to the pre-invasion lines. The status of Crimea and Donbass would be worked out directly between Putin and Zelensky. And especially given that you have many elements of the ultranationalist movement inside Ukraine who don't even want the Donbass, because it has all these ethnic Russians who want to speak Russian and want closer ties with Russia. I mean, like, the fact that the U.S. basically ordered Zelensky to continue this war and sacrifice his country, how many hundreds of thousands of people have died just so Victoria Nuland can sit there with a smirk on her face now and say what a wonderful thing it is that we blocked this deal because it would have prevented Ukraine from hosting advanced U.S. weapon systems inside its territory. It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable, and this is why Dick Cheney is supporting the Democrats. This is why the McCain family, whose McCain Institute has actually cashed in on Raytheon sales of Javelin missiles to Ukraine, this is supporting Kamala Harris. This is why the neocons have come home to the Democratic Party. This is why. I got to go now. And another great stream. If there's a chance to do another one this week, we'll do it. I'm actually working on a documentary on October 7th, and I'm supposed to be shooting it on Friday, so I may not be able to stream then, but if everything goes according to plan, we'll have a documentary out in a few weeks here at the Grayzone. We have some great stuff coming from Kate Clarenberg and Wyatt Reed, who's just back from Honduras, where the U.S. is running a really devious meddling operation. And Oscar Leon, our video editors, got some great stuff coming. Interview with former Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa about the explosive chats that we reported on at the Grayzone, exposing a decade of U.S. meddling in Ecuador. So look for that on the site, and we'll definitely be back. And thank you all for your support. I got to thank a Grayzone member.
That's a good impersonation.
Got to thank a Grayzone member for this microphone. Got to thank a Grayzone member for this bookshelf. Yeah. All right. Enjoy the debate. Aaron, anything you want to add before we go?
No. Support the Grayzone. The links are there. Good to see everybody. Thanks for being here.
Peace.